Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we're going to be implementing global goals, such as the global hatching goal. Now, hopping directly into Studio, the first thing we're going to do is start off by creating the GUI. So in order to create the GUI, what we're going to do is go inside of the Starter GUI, and we're simply going to go ahead and copy the Settings GUI. Now that we have another Settings GUI, we'll go ahead and rename one of these to be called Hatch Goal. We'll then make sure that we enable that as well. We'll then go inside of here, and for the background color of this frame, we want to make that a lighter blue. After we've done that, we can go inside of the frame, and then we're actually going to go ahead and delete the container. We're going to want to go ahead and resize this a little bit. So I'm going to make it a little shorter while also making it a little bit wider as well. Then of course we want to make sure that we perfectly center this. Next we'll go inside of the frame and we have a container inside of here. Let's go ahead and actually delete that. Then we can go to the title and we're going to update the text of this to actually say Hatch Goal. We'll also throw some stroke on there as well, so we could set that to something like 0.5. Then for the exit button, we're actually going to modify this a little bit as well. And what we're going to do is basically move it to the bottom center of the frame. Now that we've repositioned that, I'm going to go ahead and update the background color, and we're actually going to set this to a lighter green. We then have the X text label inside of here, and realistically we just want to recenter this in the middle of the button. And for the text of this, we actually want to say okay. Now that we've done that, we can look at it. I think what we want to do is make the text just a slight bit smaller. So for the size, instead of using 0.95, we'll go ahead and adjust this to 0.9 on both the X and the Y. And I think that size is a little bit better. We'll then also add a little bit of a stroke here as well. So we can set this to something like 0.5. And then for the UI corner, we'll also adjust this as well because we want to make those corners a little bit more round. So we'll go with something like 0.2. Now we'll also go ahead and resize the bun a tiny bit as well. So let's do something like that. And then I'm also going to stretch it out a tiny bit. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's then also make sure that we recenter it once again. And we'll go ahead and double check the properties. So on the anchor point of the X, we'll set that to 0.5, and on the position of the X scale, we'll set that to 0.5 as well. So that button is looking pretty good. And the next thing that we want to do inside of here is actually add a progress bar. And instead of remaking all of the progress bar ourselves, let's just go ahead and look for a progress bar that we've already created before. So we can see inside of our achievements GUI that we have a couple of frames named progress, progress bar, and progress as well. Let's go ahead and actually copy this progress frame right here, and then we'll paste that directly into our hatch goal frame by hitting Control, Shift, and V. Cool. So now that we see that, I think honestly what we could do is just take the progress bar directly from here and then delete the entire progress frame. So now that we have this progress bar, let's go ahead and resize it and reposition it as well. So we want this to appear a little bit below our title text label, and then we also want it to stretch almost the entire width of the frame, but it's a little bit smaller than that. Now, next what we're going to do is actually update the background color of the progress bar, and we're going to set this to a white. Now that we set that to a white, we'll go inside of here, and we have our progress frame as well, and we're going to set the background color of this to a lighter blue. Now we also have the amount text label inside of here, which we don't have to update at all because I think that looks good enough. And for the progress bar overall, I think that looks good as well. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and duplicate the title text label. We'll drag this down a little bit below our progress bar, and we'll go ahead and rename this to be called description. Now for the text of this, we want to say something like hatch eggs together to activate a boost. We'll then go ahead and resize this a little bit as well. So let's drag this down and drag it out as well. And now I think one of the last things that we're going to do to this text label is set the text stroke transparency to 1 because we don't want there to be a stroke on our description. Then what we're going to do is duplicate our description. We'll go ahead and resize it a tiny bit and then also bring it down a little bit as well. Now for the text of this, we're going to say something like reward, 3 2 times clicks, and that's going to tell the players what reward they're going to receive for when this goal is actually met. Now I'm going to go ahead and re-add some stroke to this as well, so let's go ahead and adjust the text stroke transparency to something like probably 0.5. Now one of the last things that we have to do is make sure that this is perfectly centered, so let's go ahead and adjust the position as well as the anchor point. We also need to rename this as well, and this text label is going to be renamed to be called reward, and then I'm just going to go ahead and check all of the other elements to make sure that they are centered, and this is actually off by just 0.001, so let's just set that to 0.5, and there we go. Now, one more thing that I actually forgot to do, so if you watch further into this video, you will see this missing from the on-screen GUI for quite some time until we get around to actually scripting the GUI, but the thing that I actually forgot is the button that the player needs to click for this GUI to open. So let's go ahead and create that, and in order to create that, we're going to go inside of the Hatch Goal GUI and simply add in a text button here. Now, we'll rename this text button just to be called button, and of course, we want to go ahead and resize it and reposition it, so make sure all that is scale. And now for where we want to position it, we actually want to position it below our achievements GUI, and we pretty much just want to make it the basic standard rectangular button. We'll then go ahead and reposition this a little tiny bit more, and I think that size and positioning looks pretty good. So then we're going to go ahead and set the text of this to blank. We then also want to update the background color of this, and we're actually going to make it a brightest yellow. Now inside of here, we're going to go ahead and add in a text label. So let's go ahead and grab our title text label, throw that inside of here. We'll then of course resize this, and the text is actually going to be the exact same, so it's going to be hatch goal. And now I've repositioned and resized it a little bit, and I think that's actually looking pretty good. Let's just go ahead and make sure that it is centered vertically. Next, what we'll do is go ahead and throw in an image label inside of here. We'll go ahead and rename this to be called icon. We'll set the background transparency to 1. We'll actually set the image of this to be our paw icon. We of course want to resize this to make it scale, and now this is how I have mine positioned, as well as for the sizing. Of course though, for the position we do want to make sure that it is centered vertically, so let's set that to 0.5 as well as that. And then finally, the last thing that I'm going to do to this image is set the scale type to fit. Take a look at that, and now I think that is looking pretty good. But of course, one more thing that we want to do is go ahead and throw in a UI corner, and I'll probably set the corner radius to about 0.1 just to make that bun look a little bit more round. Cool, and now that we've created that, we have the bun that we need to click whenever we actually want to display the GUI that we just created. So now, with that all being said, this GUI is looking pretty good, and we're pretty much done with creating that entire thing, so we can go ahead and minimize that as well as the starter GUI. Now, in order to begin scripting this, we're going to go ahead and start off by creating the hash goal config. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and then create a brand new module script. We'll of course rename this to be called hatch goal, and we'll also rename the variable inside of here as well. Now the first thing that we want to do inside of here is we want to create a variable for the replicated storage as well as the workspace. Cool, and now that we have both of those variables, we're going to want to create a variable for the boost config module as well. Awesome, and now we have our boost config required inside of this module as well. Now to start off with this config, the first property that we're actually going to create is going to be called goal, and that's going to be set to a number, which defines the total amount of eggs that we want the players to hatch in order to reach the specific goal. So we're going to say hatch goal.goal equals, and then just to start this off by testing it, we can go ahead and say something like 50. Now after we do that, let's go ahead and create a variable indicating the reward that the players will receive when they complete this goal. Now how our reward is going to work is basically we're going to use the pre-existing boost system in a very small way. The only part of the boost system that we're going to kind of use is actually the name of the boost. So something like 2 times clicks, 2 times luck, or 2 times gems. Because by using that format, it makes it very simple on our end and allows us to not have to recreate an entirely new reward system. So we're going to create a local variable called reward, and we're going to set the type of this equals to boostconfig.boost. And now that we set the type of that, we're also going to set the value of that, and for this reward we're going to use 2 times clicks. Now the reason that we need to create a local variable for that is because you can't define the type of a module's member or property. So first we have to create a local variable for that, and then once we've created that local variable, we can then go ahead and add a member to our module. So we'll say hatchGoal.reward, and then we'll set that equal to our reward local variable, just like that, and the value will be the exact same. Now that we've done that, we actually have to do one more thing inside of here, and that's going to be creating a new function. Now this function is going to be called isBoostActive, and it's actually going to accept a boost, which is of the boostconfig.boost type. Now, this is not something that we've done yet, but in order to easily replicate if this global boost is currently active, we're actually going to be storing a string value inside of the workspace, and then we're going to change some attributes on that based on if the boost is currently active or not. And now by storing that string value inside of the workspace, any changes that we make to that from the server side will be automatically replicated to all of the clients that are currently connected and will connect in the future. So we're going to create a variable called hatchGoal. Now this is actually going to be equal to workspace.hatchGoal. And like I said, this is actually going to be the string value instance that is stored inside of the workspace. So it's going to be named hatchGoal. We'll then create a variable called currentBoost, which again, like I said, the hatchGoal string value is going to have attributes added to it to define this specific information. So we're going to say hatchGoal, and then we're going to use the getAttribute method on it. We're going to look for an attribute called boost, and that'll set our currentBoost variable. We'll then go ahead and copy and paste this. And now we actually want to look for the active attribute on it, and then we can rename this variable to be called isActive. So that active attribute on that instance is going to tell us if the boost is active or not. Now, by default, we want to go ahead and return 0. The reason that we're returning 0 is because when we use this function, it's going to be actually in the stats module script. So when we calculate the multiplier for each of the individual stats, we want to get back a number such as 0 or the actual multiplier like 1, 2, or anything else like that. Now, to determine if the boost is actually active, what we need to do is we need to check if the current boost is equal to the boost that was passed to this function. In addition to that, we also need to check if the global boost is active as well, so we have to say and is active. So now both if the global boost is active and the global boost equals the specific boost that's checking to see if it's active, so if those two are the same, then what we're going to do is go ahead and return the number 1. Now again, we're returning the number 1 because that's going to be added into the specific stats multiplier. So now, with that being said, we're actually completely finished with creating the hatch goal config. Now, next what we're going to do is go ahead and create that string value that I was talking about earlier into the workspace. So we're going to go ahead and click on this plus icon, we'll look for string value, and now we see that we have that string value stored inside of here, which is just called value. Instead of it being called value, what we're actually going to do is call this hatch goal. Then we'll look at its properties, and we want to go ahead and add 2 brand new attributes to this. The first attribute that we want to add to this is called boost, and that's going to be a string. So we can go ahead and click on save. Now we'll go ahead and add one more attribute to this, which is going to be a boolean, and that's going to be called active. Now, we don't actually even have to set the values of either of these attributes, but we should at least add those attributes to this instance. Cool. So now that we've done that, and since we just created the hatch config, we might as well go ahead and use that function that we just created. So let's go ahead and update our stats module script, which is stored inside of the replicated storage, inside of the utils folder, and we'll go ahead and open that up. Now inside of here, towards the bottom of all of our require statements, we're going to go ahead and get the hatch goal config. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. Then we'll go ahead and first update the click multiplier function. So below where we have our has boost variable, we're going to go ahead and create another one. This is going to be called has hatch boost, and that's going to be equal to the hatch goal config dot is boost active, and then we're going to pass through 2 times clicks, because that's the boost that we're looking for inside of our click multiplier function. Now, we don't actually have to check if they do have the hatch boost, but instead what we're going to do is say multiplier plus equals has hatch boost. Because remember, has hatch boost is going to return either 1 or 0. And that's actually all that we have to do inside of our click multiplier function. So let's go ahead and copy this. We'll go down to our gem multiplier function and we'll paste it directly inside of here. Now this time we'll actually look for 2 times gems, and then again we will add that to the multiplier. We'll then go down to the luck multiplier, and below this has boost, we'll paste it right here, and then this time we'll check if the 2 times luck boost is active. And now with that being said, we're done implementing this inside of the stats module, so we can go ahead and close out of that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and quickly add in the networking, which simply requires one single remote event. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside the remotes folder, we'll go ahead and add in a brand new remote event, and we'll rename this to be called update hatch goal. Now, of course, we'll be using that on both the server and the client for some form of communication. Now, the next thing we'll do is start off by probably the simplest part of this, which is actually scripting the GUI. So we'll go inside of the start player, inside of the start player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and then let's just go ahead and duplicate the settings local script and rename this to be called hatch goal. Now, once we open that up, we can see all the different variables that we have inside of here. So inside of here, we still do need to get the replicated storage as well as the player service, but instead of the state manager or the settings config, we actually need the hatch goal config, and we also want to get the format number module as well. So equals require dot replicated storage dot libs dot format number dot simple, and there we go. We also want the remotes folder as well as the player GUI. Now, of course, the specific GUI that we're actually looking for is called hatch goal. We still do need the frame, but we do not need the container. Now, we can pretty much delete all the other variables and functions except for when we listen for the exit button to be clicked, but we can also delete this remote listener as well. Now, to go ahead and finish off with these variables, we want to go ahead and create a variable for the progress bar as well as the reward text label. So we'll say progress bar equals frame.progress bar, and then of course for the reward text label, we'll say frame.reward. We then have the exit button, and then below that, we're actually going to create a variable called hatched eggs, which is going to be equal to 0. Now, the hatched eggs variable is actually going to be used to store the total amount of eggs that have been hatched towards the goal in total, and we'll be using that to display within the GUI. So we'll go ahead and start off by creating a new function. It's going to be called update progress, and the only parameter that it's going to have is going to be called hatched, which is going to be a number. Now, the first thing that we want to do inside of here is we want to go ahead and actually update the hatched eggs variable, and we're going to set that equal to the hatched number that's passed to this. Then after that, we'll create a variable called goal, which is going to be equal to hatch goal config dot goal. Then we can go ahead and update the progress bar. So the first part of the progress bar that we're going to actually update is the text label. So we're going to say progress bar dot amount dot text equals, and now for the text, we're going to say format number dot format. We'll pass through the amount of eggs that have been hatched, so hatched eggs. Then we'll put a slash between that number, and then we also want to display the goal as well. So we'll say format number dot format, and then we want to go ahead and format the goal. After we've done that, we also want to update the size of the progress inside of the progress bar as well. So we're going to create a variable called %, which is going to be equal to math.min hatched eggs divided by goal. And then for the second argument, we're going to pass through the number 1. The reason that we're using math.min is because just in case the amount of hatched eggs goes past the goal, we don't want the progress frame inside of the progress bar to go past where the progress bar actually stops. So we don't want the progress bar to visually display 101%, for example. We want it to max out at 100% though. Anyway, now that we've determined the percent, let's go ahead and update the size of the progress bar. So we're going to say progress bar dot progress dot size equals. We'll then use a udim2 from scale. For the x scale, we'll go ahead and use the %, and then for the y scale, we're going to go ahead and use 1, as that's what it has always been. And now that we've done that, we're actually entirely done with that function. Now, what are we going to call that function? Well, remember how we added that remote event in earlier? We're going to go ahead and call that function whenever the server communicates to the client that the progress towards the goal has been updated. So we're going to say remotes.update hatch goal .onClient event connect. We'll create an anonymous function, which is going to have the amount of progress towards our current goal, and we'll call that hatched. Then we'll simply go ahead and call the update progress function, passing through hatched as the new amount of progress. Now, we also want to do one more thing inside of here, and that's actually update the reward text label as well. So we're going to create a new function to do this. This is going to be called update reward. It's not going to have any parameters, and simply all we're going to do inside of here is set the text of our reward text label equal to reward, and then we'll just go ahead and use the hatch goal config and use the reward from there. And now that we've created that function, we're just simply going to go ahead and call it right below it. So this function is only going to run a single time, and that's when the player first joins the game and the script has been loaded. And now that we've created that function, another thing that we actually have to do is listen for the button that we created earlier outside of the frame to be clicked for when we want this GUI to be displayed. Now, we didn't create a variable up here, but we can go ahead and do that. We'll just go ahead and name this variable open, and that'll actually be GUI.button. So now what we're going to do is just go ahead and copy and paste when we listen for clicking on the exit button. And instead, we'll go ahead and listen for when we click on the open button. Now, whenever we click on the open button, what we actually want to do is set the frame's visibility equal to true. And then when we click on the exit button, instead of setting the GUI to no longer be enabled, we just want to set the visibility of the frame to be false. So for opening and closing, rather than enabling or disabling the GUI, we're instead toggling the visibility of the frame. This is because the button that we need to click on is stored inside of the GUI, but it's not stored inside of the frame. So if we hide the GUI, then the player's never going to be able to see the button that they need to click on to make the full frame visible. Instead, we need to toggle the visibility of the frame itself so that it only affects the frame and not the button that they need to click on. Anyways, now that we've done that, we're actually entirely done with scripting this GUI. So we can go ahead and close out of that. So now that we've scripted the entire GUI on the client side, one of the last things we have to do is script the entire system on the server side. So in order to do this, we're going to go inside of the server script service, and we're actually going to go ahead and create a brand new module script. Of course, we'll rename this to be called hatch goal, and we'll rename the module variable as well. Now, inside of here, we're going to want to create variables for the memory store service, the replicated storage, the server script service, and the workspace service as well. Along with that, we want to create a variable for the hatch goal config. Then we'll create a variable for the remotes folder as well, so replicated storage.remotes. We also want to get the player data manager, which is inside of the server script service, .playerData.manager. And then we're going to create a variable for our memory store service map. So we're going to say local hatch goal map equals memory store service, get sorted map, and then we're just going to throw in a random string inside of here. And now you can think of what we're doing with the memory store service as sort of the same thing that you would do with the data store service. So when you use the data store service, you have to actually get a specific store where all of your data is actually stored at. So the key that we're going to use for this map is going to be called hatch goal. And if we ever want to reset the data for how close we've actually gone towards the goal, all we have to do is modify the string in any way. So we can set this to hatch goal 2 instead of hatch goal, and now that would be a fresh map that we've never used before. Of course, hatch goal is a fresh map that we've never used before either, but I'm just saying for future cases, this is the exact same in terms of how you can reset the data that we're using from the memory store service. Cool, and now that we have our map, what we're then going to do is create 2 more variables. The first variable is going to be called hatch since save, and that's going to be equal to 0. Another variable is going to be called hatch progress, which is also going to be equal to 0 as well. Now, we're going to start off by creating a local function called getInitialGoal, and what we're going to do inside of here is try to get the goal from our memory store service map. And when we're trying to get the goal, we actually need to wrap that inside of a pcall. So we're going to say local success, comma value equals pcall. Then we'll create an anonymous function inside of here. And then we're going to go ahead and return hatch goal map. Then we'll use colon and we'll use get async on this. And what we're looking for is the goal. Now, if we're not able to find this, then more than likely either one, Roblox's memory store service is down, or no goal has ever actually been set. So we're also going to return 0 as well. Now, if we were successful there, what we're going to do is set our hatch progress variable equal to the value that we just received. And we also want to replicate this to all the clients in our game as well. So we'll say remotes.update hatch goal, fire all clients, and we'll pass through the hatch progress. And of course, since this function is called getInitialGoal, you probably know when we're going to call it, but if you don't, we're just going to call it right after we've created it. So when our game first starts up, we want to go ahead and get the goal and then set that inside of the script so that we can easily keep track of it. Now, above the getInitialGoal function, we're going to go ahead and create another function, which is going to be called updateGoal. And now what we're going to do inside of this function is periodically, we're going to be saving the amount of eggs that have been hatched on this specific server, and then after a short period of time, we are then going to go ahead and update that data into the memory store service so that we can update the total amount of progress that has been made towards the goal from all of the servers combined. Now, the reason that we're doing this periodically and not just doing this every single time an egg is hatched is because when we use stuff like the memory store service or even the data store service, those APIs have limits on them and we're not able to call them a million or an infinite amount of times per second. We actually want to be kind of careful with how we're using this, and we don't want to call them too frequently, otherwise we're going to start losing data because the queue of all of our calls is full and then data starts dropping out and issues start arising. So when we want to go ahead and update the goal, once again, we are going to use a pcall. So we're going to go ahead and say local success, comma, and this time we're actually going to say new hatches equals pcall. We'll create an anonymous function inside of here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to return hatch goal map colon update async. Now we need to provide a key that we want to update, and that key is going to be called goal. And now we need to provide a transform function, which is going to take the old value as an input and then return return a brand new value. So this function is going to have a parameter called old value. And now what that old value is going to be is actually the amount of progress that we've made towards this goal from all the other servers combined with it as well. So now that we have that old value, we then need to add all the hatches which have happened on this server during that time since we've updated this previously. But the first thing that we're going to do is say old value equals old value or 0. So just in case old value has not actually been set yet, then we're going to set that equal to 0 as it should be. And then finally, to add in all the eggs that we've hatched since the last time we've saved, we're going to use the hatched since save variable, and we're going to return old value plus hatched since save. And now that we've created our transform function, there's actually one more argument that we need to include inside of here, and that's the expiration for how long this data should stay inside of our memory store. Now, I like to set the expiration time to the max that it can possibly be, which is 45 days, or technically this argument is taken in seconds, so it would be 3.8 million seconds basically. So we're going to say 3_888_000, and now we've set the expiration to the max that it could possibly be. Cool, so now that we've created all of that, we're now updating the goal, and now once we update the goal, we also have to do a couple of things as well. So if we were able to successfully update the goal, then what do we want to do? Well, we need to reset our hatch since save variable back to 0. In addition to that, our new hatches variable is now the new progress that we've made in total. So we also want to set our hatch progress variable equal to new hatches as well. And now that we've updated the amount of progress included from all the other servers that are currently active as well, we need to replicate this to all of our clients. So we're going to say remotes.update hatch goal, fire all clients, and then we're going to go ahead and pass through the hatch progress as well. Now, where are we going to use the update goal function? Well, right below where we call the get initial goal function and above our module variable, we're going to go ahead and use task.spawn. We'll create an anonymous function inside of here, and then we're going to use a while true loop. Of course, in every while true loop, you always want to include a task.wait, and we're going to make this wait 60 seconds. Now again, this while loop is going to be used for periodically pushing all of the data, all of the amount of hatches from this server, into basically our global count of all the hatches in total. And like I said, there are limits to how quickly you can actually update all of that data. Now realistically, the data that we're handling here is extremely simple. If you're handling data for each of the individual players on every single server, that's really where you can start to get into the API limit issues. But since we're only modifying basically one single piece of data every single time, we really don't have to worry about how often we do this, but just to keep it safe, I'm only going to update this data every single minute. Now, as we're updating this data, the first thing that we want to check is that some eggs have been hatched since we've last saved. So we're going to create a variable called has hatched since save, and that's going to be equal to the hatched since save variable is greater than 0. We also want to create a variable to determine if the goal has been met, because if the goal has been met, then we no longer even need to save any of our data inside of there. So we'll create a variable called has met goal, and that's going to be equal to the hatch progress being greater than or equal to the goal, which is stored inside of our hatch goal config. So we'll say hatch goal config.goal. So now, if we have hatched some eggs since the last save and we've not met the goal yet, then what we're going to do is go ahead and call update goal. But we also want to add an else if into here. And now if we have met the goal, then what we want to do is activate that boost and reward all of our players that are currently connected. Now, how are we going to activate that boost? Well, remember, we store that string value inside of the workspace, and now we need to update the attributes on that to indicate that that boost has become active. So let's create a variable for the specific boost, and how do we get that? Well, we use the config, and then we use the reward variable. We'll also create a variable called hatch goal, which is going to be that string value instance that we created inside of the workspace. So we'll say workspace.hatchGoal. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and set some attributes on that. The first attribute that we're going to set on that is going to be called boost, and we're going to set that equal to our boost variable. And then in addition to the boost attribute, we also have the active attribute, which we're going to set to true because this boost is now active. And finally, since we've just activated our boost, we can actually include break inside of here as well, because we no longer need this while loop to run because the boost has been activated and we're no longer needing to update the goal or check if the goal has been met or anything else like that. And now the final thing that we're going to do inside of here is include an else statement, and then we're just going to say task.wait1 and then continue. The reason that we're doing this is because if no eggs have been hatched since the last time we've saved, then rather than waiting 60 seconds every single time to check if that has changed, we're only going to wait a single second so that we can basically instantly update all of our data as soon as the first egg has been hatched, and then we'll wait 60 seconds again. Cool, and now that we've created that loop, let's go down a little bit further. Now we want to listen for whenever a player joins our game so that we can replicate to them the current progress towards the hatch goal. Now rather than just listening for when the player joins the game, we're actually going to listen for the profile loaded event from our player data manager. So we're going to say player data.profile loaded.event :connect. We'll create an anonymous function inside of here with the first argument being player. And then all we're going to do is fire off the update hatch goal remote event to that specific client. So we'll say player, and then we'll pass through the hatch progress. Awesome. And now that we've added that, we actually need to create one more function. And this function is going to be part of our module. So other scripts are going to be using this function. And this function is going to be called hatch, which is going to have a parameter called amount, and that's going to be a number. Now, the first thing that we want to check inside of this function is if the goal has been met. If the goal has been met, then we really don't even need to track the amount of hatches anymore. So we're going to say local has met goal, and we created this variable earlier. That's going to be equal to hatch progress is greater than or equal to the current goal. So hatch goal config dot goal. And again, if the goal has been met, then we want to stop the function right there. If the goal has not been met, then we need to go ahead and update the progress. So we'll say hatch since save. We'll add the amount to that. We'll also add the amount to the hatch progress, and then we'll finally replicate the progress to all the clients in the game as well. So we'll say update hatch goal, fire all clients, and then we'll pass through the hatch progress. Now, when we add the amount to the hatch progress here, that doesn't really matter, but the reason that we're doing that is basically just for a visual display. And the reason that I'm saying that is because if we go to the update goal function, because inside of here, whenever we update the goal with our hatch since save, and then add that to the old value, and then get returned the new value of all the combined amounts from every single active server, we're always basically setting that number here to the real number of what it actually is. The reason that we add it down here is just to kind of help with the visual effect, and to basically show the progress that's being made on the current server, and then after a minute or only a couple of seconds, then the progress from all the other servers will really be displayed when the update goal function is called and is successful. And with that being said, we are almost done, but we have to add one more thing. Another thing that we need to account for is for whenever a Roblox server shuts down. For how we save data currently, we're using this while loop, and if the game server was to choose to shut down, then we could possibly lose some data here because the server would not wait to shut down, and it would just completely cancel out this while loop. Now, the solution for this is extremely simple. Inside of the game data model, we have the bind to close method, and inside of here, we're going to create an anonymous function. Then what we're going to do is determine if we should update the goal, and if we should update the goal, then we will. Now, how can we figure out if we should update the goal? Well, we can go ahead and look inside of our while loop. Inside of here, we have the has hatched since save variable. We can go ahead and copy that, and then we'll paste that directly inside of here. Now, if that is true, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go ahead and call update goal. But anyways, now with that being said, we've done everything inside of here that we need to. And now all we have to do is actually require this module script and use the hatch function that we've just created inside of here as well. Now, where are we going to use that function? Well, we'll actually go inside of the egg server script inside of the server script service. Right below our player data manager, we want to go ahead and require that module script that we just created. So we'll say server script service.hatch goal. We'll then rename this variable to be called hatch goal as well. Then we'll go all the way down to our hatch function pretty deep inside of here. And right after we give the player the badge and really right before that while loop begins, what we're going to do is say hatch goal dot hatch, and then we're going to go ahead and pass through the amount of hatches. And now with that being said, that's all that we have to do. So let's go into our game and test this out. So hopping directly into our game, we can see that the hatch goal is currently 0 out of 50. Let's go ahead and hatch an egg. And we can see that when we hatch an egg, 1 progress is added to our goal. Now we can keep hatching eggs, and we can see that the progress is continuously being updated. Also, if we look inside of our workspace, we can select the hatch goal, and we can see that it is not active, and there is no boost set for it currently. Let's go ahead and hatch 1 more pet, and now we can see that we have reached the goal. Although, if we look at the hatch goal, we can see that the attributes have not been updated yet, and the reason for that is because, remember, our while loop is updating the data every 60 seconds. So we can see that this boost did just become active, so it does have a very, very slight delay. But now we can see that it is active, and the boost attribute is set to 2 times clicks. Now, when we look at the hatch goal and we see that it is currently active, and we go ahead and click, we can see that we are getting plus 4 clicks per second. We can also easily confirm that this is working by actually setting the boost to no longer be active by doing that on the server. So we can go to the test tab and then click on the button that says current client. This will swap us over to the server view. We can then go inside of the workspace, select the hatch goal, and then click on the active text box, making it blank. Now we can go back to the test tab, click on the current server. That'll swap us back to the client. Let's go ahead and click, and now we can see that when we click, we are getting plus 3 per second. So when it's not active, we're only getting plus 3, and when it is active, we are getting plus 4, so we can tell that that is working perfectly. With that being said, we now have a global goal system. Anyways, if you did enjoy the video, make sure you smash the like button, go check out my Patreon if you want to support me, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.